All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Mary Beth Gassman, and I'm a professor at Rutgers University. And I also have the honor of being the executive director of the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. And we are one of the co-sponsors of this event today, along with the American Council on Education and the Carnegie Foundation. And very, very excited for this webinar today called Navigating the Leadership for Public Purpose Classification. And this is perspectives from folks at minority serving institutions. So for those of you who might be new to the what we're going to call the LPP classification, it recognizes institutions that enhance the development of ethical leadership capacity among all stakeholders in service of the collective public good. Sounds great to me. And we are going to have a wonderful moderator today, Carla Ortega-Santori, who is the Strategic Initiatives Manager for the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University. And she will introduce our panel and be our moderator today. Carla, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us, Mary Beth, and all the team at the Center for MSIs. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Carla Ortega-Santori, and I'll be moderating this conversation. As the Strategic Initiatives Manager at the Doerr Institute for New Leaders, I am basically the manager for this LPP classification. So like 90% of my job is LPP, which is really exciting. The LPP classification is designed to recognize institutions, like Mary Beth said, that are deeply committed to developing ethical leadership capacity in all stakeholders in the service of this notion of public good, whatever your institution defines as a public good. MSIs play a really critical role in this mission by fostering leadership within historically underrepresented communities. So today we'll hear firsthand from representatives of MSIs that have successfully earned this LPP classification in 2024, and I'll tell you that is no small feat. And they will share experiences of navigating this complicated, exciting application process, overcoming challenges associated with that, and leveraging this recognition to advance leader development and LPP on their campuses. So our goal is to provide you with just practical insights to support your campus's journey towards this classification if you're interested. So we're thrilled to have these fantastic experts who were really instrumental in their institutions' journeys to achieve this classification. I interacted with both of them many times, so I know that they're very knowledgeable and very passionate about this work. So let me introduce our panelists. First off, Anthony Teague is the Director of Operations and Outreach at the Center for Community Impact and Public Purpose at Florida International University. Did I get that right, Anthony?
You got that right.
Awesome. And we're also joined by Bernadette Muscat, who is the Dean of Undergraduate Studies at California State University, Fresno. And that is a very short title for all the things that Bernadette does, because I've seen firsthand all the things she does. Is that correct, Bernadette, that title, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you both for being here today. And before we dive into the discussion, I'll provide just a quick overview, although Mary Beth did a really great job at explaining what the classification is. But if you are less familiar with it, I'll give you a short little blurb. The LPP classification is a recognition, like Mary Beth said, granted to higher ed institutions that demonstrate this very strong commitment to developing leaders across all levels. So students, faculty, staff, and embedded in the broader institutional culture. The classification assesses how campuses embed leadership for the public good into their mission, their curriculum, their co-curricular programming, and even partnerships. So it's a very comprehensive look at how it is being manifested across the culture on the campus. For MSIs, this classification provides an opportunity to highlight the unique ways that they cultivate leadership among these communities and reinforce their commitment to things like social mobility, civic engagement, and public service. So with that foundation in mind, and I'll also mention this is a completely voluntary, optional self-study. The people that decide to do it is because it aligns with their missions, right? It resonates deeply within their campuses. So I would love to start off our discussion by having each of our panelists briefly introduce your campus, your institution, and share what motivated you to apply for the LPP classification.
Any particular order, Carla? Okay. Bernadette, I'm happy to jump in and then
Go ahead, you're off mic. Go ahead, please.
Awesome, awesome. Well, again, Carla, thanks so much for inviting us to participate. I'd be remiss in not if I did not say that during the LPP process, for the number of emails that I sent you or our team sent you, pretty much any favor you ask, we're probably going to say yes at this point. So, but no, all kidding aside, thank you for inviting us. So FIU, Florida International University, we're a large public university here in Miami. For those that may not know, we're actually one of the largest HSIs in the country, with over 65% of our students are of Hispanic descent, and another large percentage represent any number of ethnic backgrounds internationally, and then certainly many of our students are coming from families where they may be the first generation to live here in America, but certainly to go to college, right? So a large first generation population as well. And even just the way our students show up, just their backgrounds, their mentalities. Carla, you touched on it before, just by nature of being an MSI, right? There are certain kind of nuances and things like that our students show up with, but that sense of purpose and community connection is really embedded in our student body. And we see that reflected amongst our staff. We see that reflected amongst our faculty. FIU has a very kind of homegrown origin story, going back to the original plaque, right? That kind of set our stake in the ground for what the university represented. Our commitment to being just a beacon for the community, to being a leader in the community, to being a space of innovation and insight and all those things, that was on that plaque way back in the early 70s. So I would say part of the motivation for us was that it's embedded in our DNA. I mean, it's truly kind of the blood that runs through the veins of the university. And FIU has grown to incredible heights. But I think we've been able to stay connected to that kind of deeper pulse of our value to our community. And then the opportunities that we have to leverage those values, our research enterprise and things like that, to just expand innovation and participate beyond the local region. I'd also say FIU's had a long history with Carnegie. We're an R1 institution, Carnegie R1 designated institution. So there's certainly familiarity on that side. But going back to 2010, we also applied as a first-time community engagement classification. And thankfully, we received that. We reclassified in 2020. We're going through the reclassification now. But I just say that to say, the synergy with the philosophy of the Carnegie Foundation, including leadership for public purpose, it's our language. I think we very much speak the same language. And this application process for us, we felt gave us a chance to really kind of look under the hood. And we know, just kind of boilerplate, right? We have a lot of intentional leadership development happening across our stakeholder groups, but the application, the self-study, as you mentioned, I think really forced us to go deep and ask, how pervasive is this? How intentional are our efforts? How is it showing up across different domains? And thankfully, I felt like we were very happy with what we found. I think we learned some things about just systematizing how we track things and things like that through the process. But I think what it gave us was a really great opportunity to validate for ourselves. And then certainly, as we shared publicly, our application for others that we partner with and collaborate with, that it's true, it's genuine, it's pervasive, and it's part of the DNA of FIU.
So I have to echo the sentiments of thanking Carla for her time and effort with all of the the application process. She was just really great in answering questions, and so many questions. So definitely a thank you to her, as well as to everybody for inviting me here to represent Fresno State. I wanted to give a little bit of context of Fresno because unlike Miami, where people, know and have a vision and all of those kinds of things of what it's like, not many people know about Fresno. And there's a connotation with Fresno that is often kind of negative. We're a small place, those kinds of things. And the reality demographically is that's not true. Fresno City is the 5th largest city in California. There's 500,000 people who live in the city and almost 1 million within the county, a county that's larger than the state of Connecticut. We're located 3 hours south of San Francisco, 3 hours north of Los Angeles, and we're nestled in between 3 national parks within 2 hours away from us, the Yosemite, Sequoia, and Kings County national parks. Demographically for us as well, 50% of people who live in Fresno are Latinx. 24% of people in Fresno hold an undergraduate degree or higher, which is in comparison 35% within the state. 23% in Fresno live in poverty as in comparison to 12% in the state. And we are in an area that's largely agricultural that feed 25% of the nation. And so these things definitely define who we are. In terms of Fresno State, the actual university, we're approximately 24,000 students. The majority of them, 22,000, are undergraduate. We offer 74 undergraduate degrees, 47 graduate degrees, 5 doctoral degrees, and 9 teaching credentials. We're an R2 campus, and we're known as an ag campus as we sit on a 1,000-acre on-campus farm. In terms of our demographics, we are an MSI. We are also an ANAPESI. 82% of our students are full-time. 59% are female, 41% male. And then in terms of who we are even further than that, 64% of our students are first gen, 63% are Pell eligible, 60%, the majority of our students are Latinx, 15% are Caucasian, Asian American Pacific Islander are 12, and then 3% are Black students. We have a very long tradition of giving back at Fresno State, and because of the demographics of where we live, that we have high levels of poverty in comparison to the state. We are, while we are a large city, we're also surrounded by very rural areas that have limited access to medical care, limited access to education. We have problems in each of the areas that you can think of, whether it's healthcare, whether it's water issues, farming issues. There's not a sector of who we are that isn't in need. And as one of the larger organizations within that environment, and as an educator, we really feel that it's incumbent upon us to give back and to help our community in so many different ways. And so it's important to us, given that about 80% of students who come to Fresno State stay in our valley. And so it's really important to us that these students go out into the community, that they become the diverse leaders that they are, that they have, an education and a background behind them to give back to their communities in each of the sectors that they'll represent. Much like Anthony said, service and giving back to our communities is embedded in who we are. It is the lifeblood of who we are. We breathe in what we fervently believe in our mission and vision, and that's to be giving back to our community and making it a better community for giving us the opportunity to be within this region. Thank you.
Bernadette, I've never been to Fresno, but I feel like you transported me with your description, and both of your lovely backgrounds give such great visuals of your campuses. So thank you for sharing. And I heard Anthony say this idea of the classifications and your campus speaking the same language, which is, I think so clear when you're talking about the classification and how it aligns with core values at both of your institutions. One thing we do know, though, is that applying for the classification after you realize, it aligns is no small thing. I would love it if you could share some of the biggest challenges that you faced during the application process and how you navigated those. Anthony, if we could start with you again.
Sure, sure. Well, the obvious first, if you want to call it a challenge, which it definitely created some things to think about, is FIU is massive. Although we may not have, the regional recognition in every case, I think we're well into 50,000 plus students, one of the larger public universities in the nation. And we've grown very quickly. FIU's just over 50 years old. And so for us, the first kind of question was, well, number one, how do we define leadership for public purpose? And the definition varied depending on who you were talking to. So that was the first challenge, is what are we actually even asking our colleagues around campus to provide information on? What does it mean? What data backs it up? And Carnegie certainly helps with that, but obviously the first question that you all ask us is, what is your definition? So we wrestled with that for a while. In fact, when we launched the process, the application process, pulled together our committees and things like that, we spent the first maybe 2 months or so just wrestling with the definition itself. And really just having honest conversations around how leadership showed up in different contexts. What does the public purpose element means? Does that change our definition? Does it force us to go deeper? How do we validate that through data or assessment and things like that? So we spent a long time just wrestling with that until we massaged out what we felt was a more comprehensive definition. And even then in our application, and thankfully Carnegie structures in a way that allows for this, is that we shared multiple definitions because it shows up differently in different places. So I think that was the first big piece, is like, how do we ground ourselves around what are we actually asking for and looking for? I would say the second element was the systems. So it's interesting, leadership maybe on its face is a vague concept, but when trying to pull data and insight and assessment information and things like that, that showcases how we embed it in outcomes and then measure it, and right, like the depth of analysis that Carnegie asked us for, that got to be that was a project that took some time, some intentionality, right? It took us bringing together folks that are heavy on the research side with folks that are heavy on the assessment side, with folks that are kind of our community, our external community facing people, putting us in a room and being able to kind of arrive at some sense of a well-rounded understanding of what this all meant. And that also took a lot of time. So I would say the other big piece was just, what are our systems that allow us to cleanly measure, track leadership for public purpose in a way that is consistent and sustainable. And we were able to kind of nail down some of those systems, but the answer ultimately ended up being is multiple systems, it's multiple things. And I think, again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, one of our learnings that came out of this is that we have to really drill down what our systems are. How do these systems operate on an ongoing basis beyond Carnegie, outside of Carnegie? And then how do we use and share that information across the university and with our stakeholders? And so I would say those were kind of our two challenges, so to speak, is just really definition and then systems for tracking.
Okay, so we had some challenges very similar to the ones that were mentioned already. I think the biggest challenge initially was the timeline. I was assigned the opportunity to cull together the information and write the actual application on behalf of the university. And the timeline for me was about 5 months. So it was not a lot of time. And so that was really a very pressure situation for me to do that. The definition was also a bit of a challenge, but not in the same way that Anthony had mentioned. Certainly, we had that with people having different definitions and those kinds of things. But as he noted, um, the Carnegie definition is quite broad, so it allowed for a lot of being able to massage that, to be able to have different perspectives of this, to come into it. I think that the challenge for us for the definition was much like FIU. We are the recipient of the community engagement. We're a two-time winner of we've earned and we won. We're very proud of that, of our Carnegie community engagement. And so that was a real challenge, that some people on campus, particularly those who've been here for a while, like, haven't we done this already? Didn't we earn this already? What's this? How is community engagement different than what we do for, what you're asking for LPP? So that was another bit of a challenge on the definition side. And then when I asked people, the other challenge was like, but this is what we do. What are you asking for? Like, what do you need? Like, they couldn't really separate out, like, this is just who we are. What are you asking for? And so that was another real challenge that went along into it. Once we got through those kinds of pieces and I worked to, separate out community engagement versus this, and, we had some conversations about what they were defining as LPP and it fit within the categories and those kinds of things. I would say the next challenge that I had was pride. And people just gave me everything under the sun. And there was so much information that they had, but they were so proud of everything that they were doing in so many different areas, whether it was their research, whether it was their personal volunteer work, whether it was, internships, service learning, community projects, things that their students are working on, how they're getting their classes into the community, how they're connecting with community partnerships, and there was just so much that people were just so filled with, excitement and pride to give back and to share. And so that became a challenge when all of this information was coming to me. How do I cull through that? How do I make sure that there aren't duplications, that there's uniqueness of what we're sharing and those kinds of things? And then the other application challenges, each question is 500 words. And so when you get, pages and pages and pages of documents to try and go through and to get that down to 500 words, was another challenge that we had. And then the other piece that was a real challenge for us was, we had a leadership team, a meeting on campus, which is about 200 individuals from across the university. And we meet about once or twice a semester. And I think it was the September meeting that we had, and the president at that point introduced the LPP application, indicated that, this was something that we were going to pursue, asked me to speak about it and that I would be collecting data and those kinds of things. And when I was finished and I sat back down, the president said, "We will be earning this." I was like, oh no, like, the pressure's on. So I think that also came into, like, the pride and the data dump, but then we were all in for, really working to achieve this and to earn this. But that was also a pressure point that I wish he didn't mention, but it was a good thing for us to come together also on this. So thank you.
An abundance of evidence. That's a great challenge, but it is a challenge because, like Bernadette said, there is a limit on what your answer can contain, the maximum words that it can contain. So choosing the very best evidence that showcases, whatever it is you're trying to answer is important. The definition, like Anthony mentioned, whatever your campus is defining as LPP, whatever your campus definition is so important because it is the cornerstone of the application. You will go back to the definition time and time again, and reviewers in the end will go back to this definition time and time again to see how it is you provided evidence of that definition that you provided at the very start. So both great examples of how you navigated those. Thank you. I have also heard from many of our classified campuses, and I think it was mentioned right now, that collaboration across different departments and stakeholders is key to a strong application, because you want everything represented, right? You want those examples, you want that pride to shine through, you want all stakeholders to be engaged, the campus to be engaged. So how did you approach or engage these different stakeholders like faculty, staff, students, and even the leadership team in this application process?
Bernadette, do you want to hop in first this time?
Sure, I'll go ahead and do
Okay.
that. No problem. So it really started with the president. That was really the key, having that really large meeting that we have a couple times a semester, and introducing it, giving us a context of why he wanted us to earn this, why he thought that this was something that aligned really well with who we are as a university. And when he served in that leadership capacity himself, and really said the context and the foundation, that was very helpful to the process. People were involved and interested and engaged, and they knew, okay, this is something that we need to come together for. So that was very helpful. From there, we did a survey to try and cull the information from a variety of different settings. When there was a lot of information from individual people, I had individual meetings with those people to make sure that I was getting all of the information, understanding the context, those kinds of things. We also had a survey that was distributed, so that we could get, full breadth across the university. And then we also did focus groups, and we did focus groups with not only our community, or not only our campus, but some of our community stakeholders that we work really closely with, to try and get a sense of not so much what we do, but what's our impact on them, and their perspective on what they think of our leadership for public purpose, and then how we are giving back to them, and that role. So for us, those were the different ways that we engaged the different people in the application process. I will say we were very fortunate that, given that the tight timeline on this, that people didn't lose momentum. There was a short time between when the president said, we will be working on this as a campus to earn this. And so people were like, okay, we need to do this. And so I think that tight timeline kept the momentum going. And so when I did reach out to people for clarification or those kinds of things, it wasn't, everybody was on board and willing to help. And so I'm very, very grateful for the collaboration that we had. But I think leadership was key in that, with, setting the stage for the importance of this for us in the classification. Thank you.
Bernadette, let me just say it took us about 9 months from start to finish. And afterwards we were like, oh my God, that's not nearly enough time. So the fact that you all did it in 5 months, kudos to you and your team. And I would echo a lot of what Bernadette said. I think for us, it started, I mean, again, given how our size and how decentralized we are in a lot of ways, it was important that we had kind of buy-in from the top. So the first key was just engaging the provost, making sure she understood exactly what the classification was. And as I said, we were very familiar with Carnegie. Once we read the framework for the LPP classification, we knew, to that point of pride, we knew it was an opportunity just to showcase what we know we already do, but just in a much more structured way. So I would say it definitely started with kind of buy-in from the top. And then from there, there were a series of kind of engagement points just to launch it, just to make sure the university knew not only that it was happening, but in order for us to successfully complete the process, we needed the collective input of folks across the university. So the provost and our vice president for academic affairs presented at the Dean's Advisory Council, which is a lot of our deans and VPs, just to kind of announce it. So Bernadette mentioned that 200-person convening that happens a couple times a year. A version of that, just to let all of our leadership folks know this is what it is that we intend to apply, and that we need their support in gathering information. From there, we also did an institution-wide survey where we invited folks across the university to submit. Bernadette, I sympathize and empathize with that massive data dump that we received, as folks are really excited to share all that they're doing. And then we also held a series of kind of formal, but then like ad hoc meetings with folks that divisions, mostly divisions, that wanted to better understand how they can participate. So we kind of received a lot of those requests, held those meetings, did the kind of clarifying that we needed. And then from there, we built an advisory committee. So much of our application was built by committee. LPP lended itself to kind of building committees around each of the sections of the application. And it's exactly what we did. Each of those committees are cross-disciplinary. And really their job was to not just review the survey information, but also from their purviews, kind of reach out amongst their collective networks and pull back additional information, and then help us start to formulate what data was most necessary for each of the sections of the application. And they were with us all through the process. So they really helped us pull together the data, build some of the initial narrative, and then eventually those narrative drafts were handed off, and we kind of moved into a revision stage where our central communications team, a senior writer on our central communications team, spent hours and hours and hours helping us refine our voice, helping us understand what things were missing from our narratives. And then we also had an executive board that was comprised of deans and VPs from around the university, and they really were meant to serve as like the high level perspective giving body as we progress through the application process. And they also got to review a version of our final rough draft, give feedback. And again, so my point being, all throughout the process, it was all about collective, cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional collaboration, input, feedback. And I think that helped us kind of take, again, a very decentralized campus and kind of pull it together around a focused effort. So yeah, can't underscore enough. It really took everyone. I mean, when we say team effort, it was an absolute team effort.
Yeah, I was just nodding throughout both of your responses because it definitely takes a village, you know, to undergo this journey, this application process. This classification, this application cannot be managed or done by a single person. It can be led by a single person. It can be managed maybe broadly. You can be the repository of data and all that stuff, but you definitely need a team across campus. You need people engaged on campus to know what is going on, to provide that data, to give you access to other folks that may be able to provide their perspective. So thank you both for giving examples of how you did that. Surveys, one-on-one meetings, open meetings, cohort, committees are a great way to approach this. So thank you for sharing. I will remind folks that our chat is disabled. So if you want to ask a question, you have to use the Q&A function. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A function somewhere, and you will be able to click in there and ask whatever your heart desires, and we will do our best to answer. Okay, moving on. As part of the application, and you've already mentioned something around this topic, campuses need to provide evidence of their leadership development efforts, of their LPP efforts. So if you could give folks an example or a few examples of how you approach documenting and measuring, those systems of tracking that Anthony and both Anthony and Bernadette mentioned, particularly maybe in ways that reflect the experiences of students at MSIs, if that made any difference. But I would love to hear some examples of how we approach documenting and measuring.
Let me go first again.
Sure, go for it, Brenda.
Okay. All right. So actually, quite candidly, this was an area that was problematic for us because, again, when I reached out to individuals, it was like, but this is what we do. It's in every class. It's in everything that we do. It's in every co-curricular work. We want students to be leaders. We want what we do to be leadership. We want to have impact. We want to give back. This is what we do. And so that was pretty problematic in terms of the data because everybody gave me everything. And I just couldn't that's not something that I could really work with because there are distinctions. And so when I, tried to work with departments and programs, like, okay, really, how much of your curriculum is leadership? The answer that I kept getting back, well, all of it, that's what we do. That's just who we are. And so we, to that end, with the next time that we go through this process, we've really started to make some efforts in this area. To be more intentional about the being able to document the specific areas of LPP. To that end, we're working on an ability to tag classes as being leadership so that it's much easier to calculate those and to quantify those. Likewise, particularly in our co-curricular areas, this was really important for us to be able to do because even when we reached out to those who work in our clubs and organizations, again it was, but this is what we do. We require them to do service. We want them to be leaders. This is what. So we've worked on being very intentional about now tagging those opportunities and making sure that we're quantifying the amount of that effort that is LPP related. We also, to that end, we didn't have a specific degree or a specific curriculum in this area. So one of the things that we've done is, since earning the LPP certificate classification, we've created an LPP certificate at the undergraduate level at Fresno State. So that again, it's very easy for us to see what specific courses went into those, the number of students who were doing those. They've got very specific learning outcomes that relate to how we defined LPP on our campus. And we are also in the process of doing that for our co-curriculars as well. So that when it comes to the assessment piece, we're much more intentional about how we look at LPP and then how we're assessing whether we've done what we said that we're going to do in that area. We're in the process of creating an LPP subcommittee on assessment so that we can, again, be intentional with that. And then we're looking at some university learning outcomes so that we can use those broadly to see how we're doing for the next time around that we're doing that. But we identified that as being a weakness on our part this time. And it really was one of the challenges for us in terms of the documentation that was required in the application. Thank you.
Bernadette, it all resonates. Very similar on our in terms of some of the examples at FIU. I will say last year we instituted a co-curricular transcript. So that was a big kind of formalized way to track students' formal leadership experiences in kind of a clean way. And that's been a huge success. I think it's a great tool that we're using to track some of this. We also are working to tag, so it didn't exist explicitly previously, but tag courses that have learning outcomes, curricular courses that have learning outcomes tied to leadership for public purpose. So now in our course catalog, you actually will see those tags. And it'll allow us, obviously, next go round to speak to not just an innovation in terms of tracking, but also, pervasiveness in a much easier way. So that was another big piece. And then I would say, I think this process allowed us to pull together kind of coordinating units, to kind of use a Carnegie word, that we know are doing this work very intentionally. So our Center for Leadership, which is heavily focused on kind of market rate programming for the external community. So they do a lot of leadership development work with our school district and elected officials and things like that. But then we also have our Center for Leadership and Service, which is heavily focused on our student population, heavily focused on civic engagement and things like that, alternative spring breaks. And then they also run some of our leadership credential programming, things like that. Our Student Government Association has a really critical role in supporting student leadership development, advocating for student leadership opportunities. Even our Greek and sorority life now has a dedicated office that's focused around the leadership development of our Greek students. But they can sometimes exist in those silos, again, large university. So I think what this also gave us was a chance to pull those groups together and help them kind of see how there's interplay around this intentional leadership development work that the university is doing. I would say, I think this is an area that it took us a while to kind of wrap our head around. Bernadette, you were kind of headed towards it, but I think the depth that we really kind of interrogate what we do around leadership development down to, okay, it shows up in a course title, but does it show up in outcomes? Okay, it shows up in outcomes, but what's the assessment tool? Okay, it's in the assessment tool, but how are you truly measuring it? And what the data that you pull out of that, how has it been used to evolve the course or add new courses or open new sections or whatever it might be? And I think that took some time and intentionality to really dig through that with that level of intentionality across the different domains. So that's curricular, but also in some of our co-curricular offerings and beyond that.
Anthony, that's a great example of all the layers of data and evidence that you need to, sort through to get to the question or to get to the answer of the question, which is, are we measuring this? Are we seeing it at the outcomes, and how does it align with our definition of LPP? Those are great examples, and I think what I take away is the variety of ways that you have to track and monitor and measure to provide this evidence. I think throughout the 2024 cycle observed how so many campuses went from not having a clear idea of how they were tracking or monitoring to, because of the classification, sort of implementing these new ways of tracking and tagging courses, or including it in a co-curricular transcript. That is a dream, by the way. I've heard so many campuses talk about, wanting to do that. So it's great that you are doing it. So thank you for those examples. Another thing that I think is asked of me quite often from potential applicants, so for this upcoming 2027 cycle, and applications are already open, so you can download the new framework. What I am often asked is, how has this designation, achieving this classification, how is it benefiting your campus now, or your institution? What are you seeing in terms of impact?
Bernadette, I'll give you a spell this time. So I think for us, I think the first thing it does is it affirms and gave us a platform for really authentically communicating our commitment to leadership for public purpose. Bernadette kicked off by saying there's kind of this implied, just understood internally commitment to leadership development, but to be able to verbalize that and communicate that in how we tell our story and how we define it in our strategic plan and where it shows up in our branding guides and things like that, I think it forced us to have some really honest conversations around it, how it wasn't showing up, right? To the outside observer of what we do, how we do it, right? Would they check that box and say like, oh no, FIU is showing up in these ways, in these spaces. So I think it's informed a lot. It's embedded in our 2030 strategic plan, specifically mentions Carnegie's LPP classification. So I think it really kind of challenged us to grab it by the horns, grab kind of this concept by the horns, and make sure that we're embedding it. I think the other piece is, and we've kind of said versions of this throughout this conversation, but it gave us almost like a party theme, right? To invite the community in, the campus community and beyond in around a focused, self-study, right? And I think that was really helpful. This notion of a cross-institutional tracking system has come up many times. I saw it even in our 2010 application as an action item for around community engagement. So institutions this large, right? It's a running challenge that we're all navigating. And although obviously the goal is that we're not only doing this around Carnegie, I think the timing of this really challenged us to do that. And I think we recognize not just the value of doing that, but that advisory committee that I mentioned earlier, we want to keep that committee. And the action items and the feedback that we got from Carnegie, that committee will be tasked with making sure we're following through on those action items, right? And as we continue in these reclassification cycles, ideally, you'll see us being able to check those boxes, right? And improve how we do this work. And so I would say that's the key. The last piece I would just personally add, and it came up at times in the application process, is making sure all of our different stakeholder groups felt that they had a part to play, that they were represented in our application. And I remember one really distinct moment about halfway through the process. We were with the committee focused on faculty and staff development, leadership development, and a faculty member that in her own merit does a ton of work around faculty leadership development kind of expressed like a little bit of confusion on rather this application was meant to capture faculty leadership development explicitly as well, because the conversation was kind of dominated around students in particular. And it was an important moment for us to not only reiterate absolutely, but I think Carnegie shouldn't be the only place that we make that very clear. So I think even just those aha moments of just, are we being intentional? Are we being systematic? And how do we sustain some of these learnings that are coming out of the process? I think it continues to be a guide as we go forward.
Yeah, for us, it was very comparable also. I mean, it certainly was a pride point for us. It was really great for us to be able to say that we earned this. We talk about doing this all the time, but that affirmation from an external source and one as prestigious as Carnegie is just really great for us to have that recognition in a larger way. And you know, when we see the other schools who also earned the designation this first year, and all of the great things that they're doing and all the contributions that they're making, it really is a great pride point for us to be part of that first inaugural class that earned the designation. So that's definitely a key point for that for us. It also confirmed the things that we felt that we were doing and we knew that we were doing, but have someone else confirm that for us, which was great. The other piece is it really allowed us to do that self dive and that self reflection, and to realize the areas that we aren't as strong in and the areas that we really need to address. And some of those I mentioned already, but to really improve ourselves. So a self improvement, continuous improvement area has been a really important key point for us. And then certainly as we apply for grants or other opportunities, to be able to note that definitively in a way that's other than just the quantitative, like we give so many hours of service or we do these kinds of things or these examples, but again, to have this stamp of approval with it or this stamp of recognition of our work has been really helpful also. And then we're in our accreditation cycle right now, and so that has really been something that we have mentioned as this is who we are. We give back, we give to our community, and to be able to again to have that classification and designation as part of that, to be able to say, and we've done this, and these are the key ways in which we have, has been really helpful for those aspects as well. So thank you.
And on the topic of pride and recognition, I'll say that over 800 institutions in higher ed mention the word leader or leadership in their mission statements. But FIU and Fresno can actually say, we do develop leaders because we've been through the study, we saw the evidence, and we were validated, for our efforts. So it is definitely a big thing to be proud of. So let's open up the time for Q&A from the audience, from the attendees, and questions that have been sent in. I will start with one that was sent in, and it says, what specific leadership initiatives have helped MSIs meet the LPP criteria? And I can give a sort of overview to that answer, and if Anthony and Bernadette have something to add, I'll let them add it. But I will say that it's less about specific initiatives and more about kind of evidence you provide of those initiatives. So you could have maybe a course in Gen Ed that all students have to take that is a great example of LPP across campus. But providing the learning outcomes, like Anthony said, providing the assessments of those outcomes and how you measure the outcomes is what is going to be really powerful in an application. If you have a cohort program, in the co-curricular programming, or in in a frat or sorority, or if it's part of the student center, some sort of program where you develop leaders of clubs, etc. It's the level of detail you are able to provide of these programs. So if they have directed learning outcomes that link back to your definition of LPP, if you have assessments, coupled with these outcomes, is what is going to be the big difference in meeting that LPP criteria, I think. But if Bernadette and Anthony have maybe a couple examples of initiatives they showcased and want to talk about, then please do.
I can hop in really quickly. Just a few immediate things that came to mind, and Carly, you touched on some of them. I think we have a course called SLS, which is essentially for all of our freshmen student life skills. For all of our freshman students, they have to take this course, and we found very quickly that there's a lot of intentional leadership and competency kind of development embedded in the outcomes of those courses. And actually through the LPP process, we had a chance to sit down with some of the folks that put those courses together and kind of drill them on how do we assess that we're hitting these outcomes with students, right? Like, what are you hearing? What's feedback? Things like that. And I think it's shaping how they continue to refine those courses to make sure we're kind of hitting the ground running in terms of helping our students understand who they are as a leader, where it fits within their academic and personal journey, that kind of thing. So I think certainly courses like that. We also have a couple of kind of embedded requirements for all students that were really great places for us to grab some of this information. So one was around global learning. So every single FIU student is required to take at least 2 of what we call global learning courses. And really, it's a lot of different kind of self-exploration, goal setting, communicating across different diverse groups, all of the competencies that we know are really important. But those courses are built around some of those types of concepts. And every single student has to take 2 of those courses to graduate, right? So you already embed in their kind of academic experience that they're going to get exposure to some of these concepts at some point. Our honors college, all of our students in our honors college have required credits that they have to receive that are essentially like community engagement credits, attending certain events that fit within a certain rubric. A lot of those types of engagements for those students, leadership development oriented, civic and community engagement oriented, things like that. And then I think the last piece, this isn't necessarily an initiative, but I think we've really bought into the notion that for our students to really survive the workforce that they're going into, not only do you have to, be kind of a well-rounded student, but you have to be able to pivot and learn new skills and adapt to new spaces and environments and things like that. Be kind of a lifelong learner and pivot sometimes. We embed that and we really buy into that. And you see that in how we kind of guide our students' experiences throughout their academic journey. And so those are just some kind of immediate things that come to mind that, Carla, I definitely agree with a lot of what you said. It's just intentionality around how we kind of get them started and how we help them funnel through the experience.
I'll jump in really quick. One of the things that we're working on right now is really to try and make sure that students have at least one LPP experience while they're here at Fresno State, whether that's in a co-curricular, whether that's earning the LPP certificate, whether it's a combination of those, really trying to quantify their service. One of the things that we do have on our campus is the Richter Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning. And through that, we quantify the number of hours. And I'm very proud to say that over the last 15 years, we've donated over 1 million hours to our community, collectively to our community. And so it's really bringing all of those entities together in a way that we can, badge or micro-credential or do a certificate or something along those lines beyond the academic certificate to really recognize, the work that's done with student affairs and organizations and communities and in partnership with the academics, and really make sure that students are having at least one very intentional experience on our campus rather than, it's done in everything and just having them leave with and graduate with this assumption that they know that that's happened, but rather that they really have a very specific experience that they can tap into and that they can articulate as they go out into their community and the workforce to be the leaders that we want them to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. And okay, next question is, did you encounter any resistance to applying for LPP? I guess folks want the tea on, who was
I can jump in really quick. I didn't, and I think it really was because of the leadership roundtable that I had mentioned already. There really wasn't any. I mean, of course, there were people who didn't respond, but that was definitely overwhelmed by the number of people who did. So if there were any pockets of resistance, and I'm certain that there were, it just wasn't anything that bubbled up to my level, or there wasn't anything that was really so counterproductive or anything along those lines. We were very fortunate that there was very strong buy-in from throughout the university.
Yeah, fortunate. I similar. I don't think we met any just explicit resistance. I will say there were certainly moments where we had to really clarify what we were doing and what we were asking of people. So I think there were maybe certain entities throughout campus that were a little slower to jump on board. But I think once the momentum started, once some of the advisory committee started meeting, the word started to spread. We sent a couple of reminders that, hey, the survey is going to close, right? If you want to contribute towards the application, right? The close date is coming soon. And then we have folks that are, okay, I saw this survey the first time, I saw the reminder. Okay, what is this exactly, right? So we got some of that. But in terms of resistance, no. And I think that again goes back to Carnegie had been introduced. We were very familiar with kind of the philosophy of Carnegie through the community engagement classification. And I'll say the other big piece is that we had buy-in from our leadership. And so I think it kind of set the table for us to get through the application process with a lot of buy-in.
Great. And I think on the topic of people and stakeholders and resources, someone asked, what kind of people do you need on your team in order to be successful? Like, what are the skill sets or expertise that you need? And one kind of expertise that I'll mention is someone that can edit or review the narrative that is being put forth, because these applications are read by humans. So it's important to include that. Oh my gosh, and we are almost out of time. So Bernadette, Anthony, if you have anything to add to that.
Underscore what you said. I can't reiterate enough how important that piece is. Just the one voice, right, is really critical. I think it needs to be diverse perspectives of the university, right? Everyone may not be contributing information that's going to go directly into the application, but I can't tell you, there were so many times where a comment, a remark, a piece of input opened up additional questions and conversations that ultimately got us to something that we thought was really critical for the application.
Yeah, and the other piece that I would say that's really important for this is certainly the editor, but having your assessment coordinator or a comparable person on board is really important. And then also your Office of Institutional Effectiveness or Institutional Research or something like that is another critical piece, because there's a lot of data points that are needed for this. So to be able to reach out to them readily and to get the data really quickly is important. And then depending on where you sit, I'm in academic affairs, so it was really important to have partners in student affairs as well, to bring the two large divisions of the university together to be able to get that full picture is really key.
time flies when you're having fun, and we are at time. This has been so incredibly insightful. I hope you've found this useful. A huge thank you to our panelists, Anthony and Bernadette, for sharing your experiences, for going through this application in the first place, and being great sports. As you have heard throughout the discussion, this application process is a worthwhile journey, although it is a journey. So if you are looking to strengthen your LPP efforts, it is definitely the right path for you. Before we wrap up, some important notes. A special thank you to the Center for Minority Serving Institutions for their continued support in advancing leadership development at MSI's. Thank you, team. For those who may want to revisit today's discussion, a recording will be sent out to all attendees. We will also provide any additional resources, so links that you might need that we mentioned, resources. If you are interested in applying for the 2027 cycle of the LPP classification. Also want to thank you all in the audience for joining us here today. We appreciate your engagement. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.